Hello, nerds, and welcome. We are Crossing the Nerdverse, bringing you yet another episode. My name is Travis. I'm joined, as always, by my fantastic co-hosts, Eric, Ryan, and James. This week, we're going to continue our ventures into factions of the 40k universe, talking about Aeldari. But first, as we start all episodes, we're going to give a little current news, and this week was Sony's PlayStation Showcase. So, leading us off, James, why don't you go first?
So we're each just going to kind of give a little brief overview of what we're excited about that came out of that. For me, it was Onimusha, Way of the Blade. Super excited. I was a fan of the previous games. This one looks fun, and some kind of cool thing about it is they're using the likeness of an actor who's very famous in Japan for playing Miyamoto Musashi to portray Miyamoto Musashi in the show is the guy who was in like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo and stuff like that. So yeah, that's I think pretty cool, and I'm pretty excited for it.
All right, Ryan, what you got?
Looked over the entire deal, and I have to admit that there wasn't a whole lot that jumped out at me from the Sony run, but there was one that I thought was awesome, and that's going to be Directive 8020. So this is going to be a sci-fi horror from Supermassive Games. It's the latest in their franchise, coming through from the Dark Pictures anthology, which I don't know if y'all have ever played any of the other games, but they're kind of interactive novels, and it's a heavy Your Choice Matters style game. This particular one is got a sci-fi bent to it. It's about an alien organism that infests a space station, and the crew kind of going through there. Just like all the other games, your choices matter. Depends on who lives, who dies, what kind of ending you get. It's that style of game. This particular one has Lashana Lynch as the main character, which I'm super stoked about, along with Colin Bates and Avatar Volva, and a lot of really, really talented people coming together for this one. And for a spooky game, it's slotted for an October 2025 release, which I think is perfect timing, just in time for Halloween. So stoked about Directive 8020.
Eric, what do you got? Wait, is it a Pokemon game? Just kidding. It's close.
It is close. So I went with there's a new Digimon game coming out. Digimon Storytime Stranger. They're kind of doing the thing that everybody's doing now. They're going to be doing a multiverse / multi-time game. I don't get it because when you watch the preview, it talks a little bit about the multiverse, but it only mentions time once. So I don't know how it's both. But we get Agumon back, so that's really nice. You also see the main character using like an actual gun, like a weapon, laser, something of the sort. So that's kind of interesting because in Pokemon and Digimon games in the past, they've never used their own weapons. So maybe they're stealing something from that new PAL game. But yeah, the graphics look really blah. Like I'm not excited about that. So I'm going to gather the story's going to be pretty good. If that's what they're going to try to sell the game on. Just because the graphics are definitely nothing to smirk at. I think it's early in it. And it hasn't been talked about too much, so hopefully they'll improve upon them. But as long as I get Agumon and I can shoot things, that's really the perk for me. Yeah, that was the game I was the most excited about.
I chose Darwin's Paradox. Again, my addiction to platformers and side-scrollers is shining through. It is a like stealth-based platformer game where you play as an octopus named Darwin, and you are escaping a like cooking facility of some kind. So you have to escape from like evil chefs and sneak your way out of like the compound and back to the ocean, rescuing your friends along the way. So I'm pretty excited about it. PlayStation's done a good job with a lot of those like platformer style like side scroller games, especially with like Unraveled and Unraveled 2 are really some of my favorite more modern platformers. So yeah, super excited for Darwin's Paradox releasing sometime 2025 on the PlayStation 5. Concrete confirmed date yet, but I assume it's probably going to be fairly soon, or first half of the year at least.
Now, the last thing I want to just kind of get everybody's opinion on with this before we jump in, because I know Aeldari is probably going to take us more than one episode, because it's a rather deep history, and I think people would love to hear more about them. But PlayStation, anybody like truly excited? They put out more games than Xbox, but I definitely found not as exciting. Like Xbox, I think did 5, and they did a bit more than that. But just real quick, what you guys like? I'm not super excited like I was with Doom.
Yeah, I have to admit that you are right. They're putting out more titles. I noticed two things really with the Sony showcase. And that's that they didn't really release a lot of surprises. Most of everything they talked about was already discussed or revealed earlier. There were a couple kind of come out of the woodwork, but nothing really jumped out like that. I do think that there is an approach of quantity over quality when it comes to some of the games. And that has nothing to say bad about the developers. I could be very wrong about that. This is just an opinion. But none of the games really jumped out to me. And I even tried to pay attention to the games that are normally not in my wheelhouse, right? And so obviously I picked Directive 8020 because I'm a big fan of the horror games and narrative-driven games in general. But there was also like 2025 was on there, and it doesn't look like anything special. And yeah, I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with Sony's. I had a similar interaction with Xboxes, if I'm being honest, with a few notable exceptions when we talk the ones we talked about in the episode. But I do think that 2025 is looking to be a year of amazing games, and for some reason, Sony only brought in a couple of swingers, a couple of really quality games for their whole showcase.
It's a state of play. It's not a showcase, first of all. So it's not. They never do state of plays with big new titles. They always save those for like Game Fest and stuff like that. I think the same thing. Like people, like what we talked about last time. Like they didn't bring out the big guns, so to speak. Any of the things that we've been hearing, rumors and stuff about, because it's just a little like, hey, this is some of the things we're doing. Quick little thing that they're gonna bring out the bigger stuff later in the summertime or at Games Fest, stuff like that.
I suppose that does make sense. Obviously, we have E3 and some of the big game stuff coming up in mid-year. I guess I was just expecting more for quarter one, like previews and quarter one release trailers than we ended up getting. So
I mean, this is pretty typical for Sony's state of play, I think, historically. So, I mean, I wasn't super surprised about anything on the title. I think Borderlands 4 was probably like the biggest hype game on that list just because the Borderlands series has been really good so far. Excited to see another title. But yeah, as far as what I was most excited about being Darwin's Paradox. But yeah, I mean, none of it is going to be super duper exciting. It's just stuff that's coming down the pipeline, usually fairly soon. But all of their big announcements are going to come at the later, like summer releases, because I know Xbox does their big one in like June. I think Sony and some of their studios have one in July or August. So that's usually when their big reveals come in. And that basically just gets you hyped for the holiday season, because that's usually when they're going to announce some of their surprise release dates, is to get you primed for holiday spending.
Yeah, because big movies come out in the summer and big games come out in the fall. It's how it always works.
Also, you
Yeah,
see a
that's
big
fact.
spike in playtime in the winter because people are inside more often. So
That's where I get this.
makes sense.
Yeah. So
All right.
go ahead, James. Throw us into this whole
Well, before we do,
Eldari.
let me go ahead and do the whole call to action algorithm shenanigans. Guys, we're going to be getting into the Aeldari. It's a really interesting topic. I want to do two things. First, I want to kind of let you know that the best way to support the channel if you're enjoying what you're watching is to do all the algorithm stuff. Click the like button, tell your friend to do the same. Second best way to support the channel is buy some merch. Everything's located in our link tree. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to do this every 40K episode. 40K is a expansive, immersive, and extensive setting. There is no
Wild
such
lore
thing
heavy.
as canon. There's no such thing as not canon. It's rife with pop culture references all the way from the 80s. And so there's going to be some discrepancy with things you read in a novel versus what was in the codex and that kind of thing. So be prepared. We're going to do our best.
Everything is canon and nothing is canon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amen. Okay, so to start with Eldari, I mean this is a story of all the problems I think right now in the 41st millennium, and it's starting 10,000 years ago is when it all went tits up, so to speak.
Tits out.
Things were
So
going so well for them.
that
They really were.
they
Yeah,
were
they
literally
really
a
were.
utopian society. First of all, Eldari are super advanced space elves.
Yep. That's
And
a
literally
perfect summary.
they're
potent
literally space
psychers.
elves. Yeah, they're all born with psychic powers, aka magic. They're space elves. They are long-lived. Some of them nearly immortal, actually, but that's for another time. So they have this society. They're spread across the galaxy. They are the greatest empire. Nobody really can stand against them. They're doing great, but because of their long lifespan, they don't experience emotions as well, and because they don't have anything to do as far as like labor, everything's automated. All their food, everything, they are free to pursue whatever passions they have, and they begin to do this to just wild extents, doing everything to the extreme that they can. Which, if you've listened to some of the previous episodes, sounds somewhat like a chaos cult we've mentioned before.
Yeah, a little bit.
And that's because, and I think the real villains of this whole story, I think actually I was thinking about this, might be the Aeldari who become the Drukhari. I think they might be the villains.
Yeah, and
Most villainy of the villains.
No, they're the villains, dude. Because listen, like so they, like I said, they start making these little cults where they're like seeking esoteric knowledge or fucking torturing each other or just wild orgies. Like they're just doing all this crazy stuff. And this is like towards the end of their empire.
Yeah.
So you have a couple already start to branch off from them. Like they're like they have seers, and they're like, this is not working. This is not going to work out. Like bad things are going to happen. So a couple factions.
The Farseer cults.
Yep, a couple factions like we're like, well, we're gonna dip out. So they create the craft worlds, which are like continent-sized ships, and they set sail away from the what it was now known as the Crone worlds, the home worlds of the Eldari. Also, you have the Exodites at this point who are like, they want a simpler life. They think that this excess is kind of crazy, so they leave for these newly seeded, like very verdant worlds, way out on the edge of space.
Very Amish
like,
mindset. Like
they live a nomadic life. They're like, get away from us. We're going to go back to raising cattle, raising animals and stuff like that. Meanwhile, you have people that are these cults that are in the warp or in the immaterium, creating little cities where they can have sex and torture people. Like it's literally what they're doing.
So the
all this-
draft.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah,
yeah,
but you gotta understand. So there are a few key features. Bones has crushed it. He's hit the nail on the head with everything that he said. But there's a couple of details that really stand out, right? So we do have this utopian society. There is no labor needed. Everything's set up, and everybody is getting into these mindsets and these cultural sets that eventually will devolve into the different sub-factions of the refugee race of the Eldari. But Travis already noted one of the ones that is the most important to this whole story, and that is the Farseer cults. Now, the Farseer cults are obsessed with using divination to try to find the best path for stuff. At the fall of their empire, which we'll discuss at length here in just a minute, the Farseer cults were warning everybody, this is bad. You're like killing people for fun. You're bathing in the blood of children. Like, you've really got to stop because this is where it leads us. Now, in 40K, divination is probably the trickiest thing to work. It has serious side effects. It has the bad habit of locking the timeline down and making it immutable. And it also has a bad habit of creating multiple timelines within 40K. Divination is super squirrely. And so, right at the fall of their empire, they have all of these Farseers that are trying to warn them, the bad stuff is coming, the bad stuff is coming. But they made it where the bad stuff had to come by looking at it. They put it into a quantum locked temporal state. I wanted to bring that up because it's like at that point they were screwed. They had already dug their own hole.
Also important to note that the Eldari had developed a portion of their technology through their psychic power to where they could be, their souls essentially could be recycled into a different body. So you had ones that were, is that?
I'm getting to that. They didn't They didn't.
Was that after the fall?
They didn't go. So their souls would go to the Immaterium and be born. That is pre the fall. That is just how they work. Nothing
Gotcha.
in the warp hungered for their souls, so to speak.
Yeah, the warp was
Like they-
calm at this point.
Yes, it was not completely calm, but it was much calmer than it is now. And
Yeah.
as I said, like there was nothing that was in the warp that cared about the Eldari. They were kind of like a whatever until okay, back to the debauchery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens is like there is a psychic connection, especially with the Eldari. They're very like psyker heavy at this point, and they have a really strong connection with the Materium. And all of this chaos, all of this debauchery, all of these emotions they're expressing are coalescing in the Materium, and essentially reaches a critical mass and explodes into life. The super fun Chaos God Slanesh,
Yeah.
which
Slanesh of the Salutes.
has first of all a very immediate effect, and this is where things get like real wild, and this is where I think
Yeah,
like
things
this is
get
where things
weird.
this is where things go tits up, so to speak. Slanesh kills almost all but 3 of the Eldari gods. One of them is rescued by Nurgle.
Yeah.
So that's fun for her.
That's fun.
Because Papa Nurgle loves you.
Yeah. So this birth of Slanesh creates the Eye of Terror, which is
Mhm.
where the Eldari homeworlds were.
Past tense being the correct iteration of all of the
Well, and
Eldari worlds.
Here's the funny part about using the term past tense. Ultimately, all 4 of the Chaos Gods are eldritch entities. They are outside of any of our understanding of reality. Slanesh is no different. When Slanesh was born, we have a distinct point when that happened because the universe exploded. More importantly, 2 things happened. First, the warp exploded because, thanks Eldar, fucked it up for everybody. But secondly, when Slanesh was born, because of her eldritch state, she was born into a state of being where she had always existed. She folded the timeline into a Mobius strip and made it where she had always been around. She will always be around in the future. Her birth broke everything.
That's chaos. Actually, I didn't focus on that part. More importantly, her birth also killed countless billions
Billions.
of Eldari and other psychers, like not just Eldari, but anybody basically connected to the Immaterium in some way could have died.
It's theorized that her birth led to the entire genocide of multiple species across the galaxy.
So weakened the 3 other Chaos Gods in the process.
Like I said, she killed all of the Pantheon except for Isha, who was saved again by Nurgle.
Yeah.
Though it's interesting, I think a little side tangent. Nurgle supposedly has her, and it continuously feeds her all of the diseases that he has. She's like the goddess of fertility and like health and stuff like that.
Healing and stuff.
And so she is fed these diseases and then whispers them to mortals, like the cures to them. So she's like secretly trying to work against Nurgle.
It's
which I think
very
is
like
fun.
Hades Persephone vibe.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting thing to bring up too. The Eldari are like an amalgamation of like Greek, and Norse, and like Irish, like Celtic mythologies. Like it's so very like blatant at times.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I make
Old
the
school
joke
40K,
about
just always right.
Yeah.
Right there.
But I think they were going for an Atlantean thing, right? Like you take all of these cultures from all of these mythos that we have on our world, and they kind of made the Eldar out of it.
So so that's the Isha. Cain, who is the second most powerful. He is the god of like war. He's a very important character still because he fought basically Slanesh to nearly a standstill. Slanesh was not able to kill him, but his psychic impression was dispersed, and he became part of these avatars of Cain. They're like
they're
fucking,
like shards.
Yeah, indomitable war machines is what they
Yeah.
really are. But they just chill, and it's in the craft worlds, right? They're in the craft worlds. Yeah, so they chill in the craft worlds. kind of part of what keeps them safe, and they activate and fuck shit up every now and then. Basically,
So
what they
let's
do.
move into where we get into what I called the refugee state, right? Because when Slanesh was born, Bones is right. She killed billions, all of them. She decimated the Eldar race, and only a small group of them survived. Now, the bad thing about the bad thing
by
about
comparison to their population before.
well, and survived is kind of a loose term for some of them as well. But the problem with it is they're so intrinsically tied to Slanesh at this point that they have a serious problem. And that's the fact that Slanesh is just a full black hole vacuum for their souls. Side tangent for just a second. In the 40k universe, not only are souls a real quantifiable and tangible thing that you can interact with and manipulate using psychic powers, but the more potent the soul, the more vibrant the soul, the brighter it shines in the warp, and vis-a-vis the more powerful psychic powers you can use. The Eldar are an extremely potent psychic race with very, very vibrant and powerful souls, and Slanesh gets to feast on these ad nauseum. Whenever an Eldar dies, she eats the soul.
Yeah, so this after her birth, they are no longer free from something that hungers for them. They no
They have
longer
a predator.
reincarnate as they were. They are now just being eaten by Slanesh, which does bring us to the different factions, and they are essentially different factions in that how they prevent their souls from being eaten by Slanesh is what essentially separates them.
Now, at this point, I do want to point out that there are about 12 to 17 different factions of Eldar. Guys, we're only going to be talking about the big four,
5.
really, in this, five, in this kind of first episode. If you have a specific interest in a particular Eldar faction, be sure and let us know. Hit that comment section, tell us what you want us to talk about, and we'll bring it up in Chapter 2.
Yeah. So first we have the Craft Worlders, who are like they follow a very strict theological practice, essentially worshiping one
Yeah.
of the father of their pantheon previously.
Well, and they're kind of based around the idea of like our debauchery and freedom created evil, so now we're going to hyper
Yeah,
organize it.
they are.
High elves.
No,
That's good.
I was trying.
it was close. Like
I'm
you're on
trying
the
to
path,
relate
but
all the elves to D&D
They're
or
very like
fantasy in general.
they're very they still have the technology, but they're very like monkish in their way of thought,
Yeah.
right? Like they have to be, because their willpower is what keeps them from falling to Slanesh. In fact, some of them leave these craft worlds and become corsairs or whatever, but they almost always have a limited life afterwards because they don't have the will to fight off Slanesh for that long.
And on the subject of, they developed a very particular way of trying to preserve their species in perpetuity and ward off the great predator in Slanesh, and that is the use of Soulstone.
See, that was the technology I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yep. So they all wear a soul stone. When they die, their soul is like into the soul stone, and then
It's
they
a
are taken.
Ghostbusters box.
Yeah. Then they are taken and put into the
The Well of Eternity?
it's the core of the craft
Yeah.
world. It's what powers the craft world. And actually, they can use those souls too. Still, they can come and interact with them. They become wraith guards and stuff, wraith knights. So it's a pretty fun little bit. So
But
that's
it keeps
kind of like
yourself from getting eaten.
yeah. Do what you got to do, right?
Yeah, I think
That's
I think
kind of
I'd rather be attached to an automaton than getting
brief
snatched up by the one who thirsts.
overview of over the craft worlds. We'll probably talk about things more in depth at a later point, but
So
the craft worlds.
effectively, the craft worlds, you have the soulstone technology. That's a key feature. That's how they protect their souls from the predations of Slanesh, and their monkhood state, which leads into the entire way that the craft world Eldar function. It's basically like factionalism, like classes kind of deals, but you're choosing a monk path to walk, and you can walk that until you're an expert, or you can walk multipaths. We'll cover that in the Craft World specific chapter coming up.
Asuriani, that's what they're called. That's the way of the Asuriani or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Asurian
Asuri-
was their god, so they're like they're called the Asuriani. That's their designation
official title.
for a not centralized Eldari anymore.
Yeah. So
then you have the Exodites,
number 2. Yeah.
which I mentioned earlier. They
The
actually,
dinosaur riders.
they actually escaped a lot of the nastiness that happened, being already like way out on the edge of space. Not completely, but they are actually protected by the world spirit or something like that.
Yeah,
Essentially, the tears of their goddess Isha that crystallized and fell into these planets, and that's where their souls go. I'm not really sure on all that. I don't know that much about the
Yeah.
Exodites.
The Exodites are really known for a couple of things. I mentioned the dinosaurs a minute ago, and that's a kind of an inside joke because they do indeed ride
No,
dragons
they're
and they ride
dragons. Yeah.
dinosaurs. But the key,
Suspiciously look like dinosaurs.
the key features for the Exodites is the Exodite is the landing pad for like Eldari outcasts and wanderers, and they're kind of just like they live out in the boonies. They're frontiersmen, and they help out the Eldar.
Well, kind of like their outcasts. It's definitely the people that went when they were seeing all that debauchery happen, it's like, we need to live a simpler and more pure life, Amish style. Because you do have your other like actual outcasts, and that's the Asunyari outcasts, which is more of a minor like sub factor. So we're probably not going to get into that faction.
Yeah, so I think one of the other kind of major factions, when I say 5, is because you have like the Outcasts and Corsairs.
Yeah, the Corsairs I assumed was.
Hold on. We
What
skipped
you
a
got,
very
Eddie?
important thing here. You mentioned dragons. So I have to know this real quick. Can a dragon take like, can
Okay,
he take one of the big
so
guys? Like what
here's
is the
the thing.
dragon the equivalent of for like Space Marines?
Here's the thing. This depends heavily on which novel you read first. Now, there was one point in the 40K history, and I'm not going to delve too deep on this because it'll eat up the whole episode, but the insertion of dragons into 40K came in lots of different forms, one of which was just T-Rexes, like they were just Tyrannosaurus Rexes that were a little bit larger. They're kind of kaiju T-Rexes that almost led to the fall of the Empire. Like
Longer arms is why they were.
Yeah.
they could finally reach things.
Could you imagine?
When I say the term dragon in 40K, this isn't like dragon in D&D.
It means big lizard.
It means big lizard. You'll find the term drakes used, especially like with the salamanders and stuff. They fight drakes on their homeworld in order to make their cloaks and such. So dragons, in regards to the Exodites, is just kind of a big lizard that they ride.
And it's not even that. Like, there's like dragons is just like a broad term for basically all of these different kinds of big lizards. Like, there's several different species with different purposes on their planet, and they are all things that they seeded previously before going there. Like, they're not native to these planets. They put them there first.
And not to be confused with the Void Dragon, which is something entirely different that we're not going to talk about.
No. Yeah, but okay, so it didn't answer my question though. If I'm riding a space dragon, could I take a Space Marine?
No.
Depends on which space dragon.
And it depends on which Space Marine.
Like a generic Space Marine.
No.
Well, there's no such thing as a generic Space Marine. They're all different. But on the tabletop,
it has to be something extremely tough, extremely large, and usually fairly intelligent to take out a Space Marine. Because you're talking about people that can compute like our brain power in a matter of like seconds. That would take us minutes.
It's a whole thing. And this is where you get into the fanboy stuff, is because we immediately go into, well, who wins in a fight, right? There are so many factors to who's going to win in the fight.
It's so conditional because some of them are like absolutely gigantic.
Additionally, a Space Marine's capability on the tabletop versus the capability when they're the main character of the novel is dramatically different.
Yeah. It really depends on who the author is.
Yeah, I mean,
perspective.
You have humans killing Space Marines occasionally in the books. That's not going to happen in the tabletop. Like, that's just not going to happen.
One. That's not true. One lasgun is diddly. 400 lasguns is
No,
a
I said
lot of
a
diddly.
human.
Yeah,
a
a
human.
human taking out a Space Marine is
But yeah,
absolutely not. No, it's like turning on
John,
your flashlight.
McClane could do it.
No, he couldn't.
Well, here's the funny. John McClane has stats in 40K. He's an Imperial Guardsman. Congratulations. So's Rambo.
He's no
for the
Sly
record.
Marbo.
Yeah. But so yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't translate well. The question of who wins in a fight when it comes to 40K is kind of a moot point because we get to look at things like Commissar Yarrick, who kills orc big bosses no problem. You take
Until
a
he
Commissar in
died.
tabletop and put it up against an orc war boss, and you don't get to walk away from that. Like they don't. No.
There's nothing you do.
You're just gonna get bodied for free.
Yeah.
But
And so
we're getting
going
off
back to
track.
I only wanted to get off for a minute.
That was
Sorry.
your fault. That was your fault, Eric.
Yeah,
But I had
yeah.
to know. That's the fanboy
It's not that-
question. Like,
it's
it's
not
a
that-
dragon versus a space
It's not
marine.
that
Come
type
on.
of dragon.
Now, I will say this: the dragons do take a squad of Space Marines in the literature, so the dragons have the edge.
Depending on the
yeah.
perspective of the
Corsairs. Outcasts.
Corsairs.
Corsairs and outcasts.
Largely, these are made up of people who leave the craft worlds. They're not like
Yeah.
They want to get out of the whole. There's a caste system there as well. Like you do what you have to when you're born into that job, and you cannot change. Eric,
Real quick, this is actually a pertinent question. Before we go on with all these, do they do the armor stuff like the Space Marines in the sense of like, does each one of these 5 have their own like colored armor and things like that to identify
So-
them?
Here's the thing: you can't think about it in terms of parallelity with Space Marines outside of a particular faction. Now, Craft World Eldar, yes, each individual house path has a type of armor and certain war gear that they use in it, practice with. Each craft world, each ship itself has a color scheme that they follow.
heraldry.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that kind of stuff. And so the craft world would be like saying craft world alert is like saying Space Marine. Like it's a very general term that gives you an idea of what you're looking at. But there's a really big difference between an Ultramarine, a Salamander, and a Carchardo. Same with the craft world. Dealing with a Warp Spider or a Swooping Hawk is significantly different than dealing with like a Phoenix Lord or a Seer. And that is not including the fact that the Corsairs that we're going to talk about and the Drukhari and the Aeldari and all of these other factions are entirely separate and distinct peoples. So they all have a common ground. They all came from the Aeldari. They ain't like that no more. The cultural stuff has varied wild.
That's just what I mean. Like if you look at the Space Marines, all the chapters and stuff are different. They all have, well, like you paint them a certain
You'll-
way for the armies and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, you're gonna have some like different. Like when it comes to like assembling and painting for like the hobby side of things, your different craft worlds or factions or whatever are going to have like certain heraldry just the same, and it's that way for every faction in 40K. Like no matter who it is, like you have the orcs that have the different color schemes depending on which orcs you're playing. Same thing with the Eldar. But I had a question for Bones, and I always get this confused. Are the Corsairs or the Drukhari the ones that live in the webway?
that's the Drukhari.
The
Corsairs.
Drukhari
That live
The
in
Corsairs
webway.
are they're just pirates. They
just pirates?
are
Okay.
they are nomadic in the sense that they go where they can. They're not usually welcomed onto craft worlds, but only for like a little bit because
Yeah.
they don't have the same shielding, the same will. Slaanesh can find them, and so
Yeah, they
attract
survive by
Slaanesh.
moving.
Yeah, so they keep on the move. That's like their whole thing. They become pirates. They raid, other species a lot, occasionally other Eldaris. Yeah, they do what they gotta to survive. They're very like cutthroat people, just doing what they can to survive, essentially.
And they're basically fucking heroes compared to the Drukhari.
Yeah, we'll get there actually. Yeah, well, I mean that's next. I guess we'll talk about the Drukhari. Again, so they are the villains of the story, without a doubt. Like, so when all of this shit happened, these people have been living in the Immaterium already. They were being terrible already. They have these cities now where they were like cults before. Now they're like more isolated, but they decide. They first of all they're like, oh, like we don't, we're not affected by Slanesh. We got away, woo. But then slowly they just start dying as their soul is being siphoned off, and they're like, oh shit, we're dying. Let's fucking start torturing people again because apparently that we can feed off of their pain. So that is their whole defense against Slanesh is kidnapping and torturing people for as long as they can without killing them.
Essentially feeding Slanesh via.
Which that's their defense against Slanesh because it also empowers them. Like it empowers them, keeps them from dying. But yeah, they're also empowering Slanesh, so they are doomed, and they are not doing anything about it really.
They just kind of have embraced the fate because.
Well, and here's the fun part about it: they haven't embraced the fate; they're just kind of dumb. But there is I'm going to call it a theory at this point. It used to be the canon lore. Again, there's no such thing as canon. So the Drukhari are really good at only a handful of things. Torture in all of its forms. Raiding and kidnapping, they're basically slavers, like fast hit slavers. But the kicker is, but they're all, according to certain sections of the lore, they're all soulless already. They've already lost their souls to Slanesh. The way that they survive is through an extensive series of cloning. Because several of the cults were all involved in, they're called homunculi, but in flesh manipulation and mutilation and cloning. And so they get to stay alive by just 3D printing another one when you die. And so they frequently scan themselves, and it's a whole thing.
They have there's kind of like two-tier society. They have the half-born, which is like the vast majority of them, the ones that are born out of tubes. And then they have call them full-born, I think is what the term is.
And nobles.
Or ones that are born from natural birth, which is like a super rare thing for them. And they're like put up on a pedestal, basically. And they're already terrible people. So just imagine if you're a terrible person, and then you get to be better than everybody around you.
And also you get to justified in your actions because your debauchery and torturing of other people in all of its forms kept you safe from the predations of the giant Cthulhu monster coming to kill you.
It's essentially safety by feeding the predator. Like if it's not hungry, it won't eat you, even though there's no limit to the hunger of a chaos entity in any regard.
Well, and that's them now too. Like they hunger for the same thing, like for the torture, for the emotion that they are extracting from these people. Like if they don't do it, they start to starve and feel a gnawing hunger
and decay. One thing I wanted to bring up, since they exist, the webway is how the Aeldari move around the galaxy. It's not connected to the warp. It's
transdimensional holes.
Yeah, that have pathways. So that's why they called the webway. But with them living inside now this is the canon that's not canon, that's sort of canon. Since they're doing all of this torture and stuff in existence inside the warp, it's actually leading to the decay of the webway as more and more chaos energy or warp energy is being flooded into the webway. So they're also partially responsible for the decay of the webway.
Which we don't have to worry about that too much anymore, because once the Great Rift opened, it destroyed Kimura and most of the webway. So
yeah, there's definitely
Yay!
R.I.P. webway.
Yeah,
I mean it's still there, but
so real quick, James, in regards to these fantastic elves versus the Chaos God, so does she only eat them when they die, or does she, if she finds them while they're alive, does she eat them? How does this work? Because you're saying they hide from them.
It's a little bit of both. There are several different defense mechanisms they found are working. There's no way of telling what Slanesh is allowing to work because she's feeding off of the fear, or if she's actually incapable of it. I think the basic rule of thumb is that the Chaos Gods get to be called Chaos Gods because there's not really limits to what they can do. If it's within their purview, they can accomplish it.
Yeah, and most of them, in the regard, they're not coming into the materium itself and snatching up.
That's what I mean.
They're waiting. It's a waiting game for them. So as a cosmic undying entity that exists like in the war, patience is a virtue that all of them have, and so they just wait for you to die because your soul's coming to them anyway.
Well,
'Cause
and
it's the
time
So
is
it's
underworld.
more
real
of
for
like
them.
a position
So
of who's getting the most, which is why you have, again, being constantly fed because the world, like the entire galaxy, is in
It's
chaos
just
and in
war.
battle with one another. So yeah, he's being fed by all of these souls that are dying in war, which in turn is also feeding Nurgle, because with war you get disease
comes
and pestilence.
pestilence.
Those always come hand in hand, especially when armies are affecting things like biological warfare. Virus bombs are not unheard of. So
Especially
again,
in
you're feeding
Warhammer.
Nurgle with those. You get the thirst for knowledge that comes with that because you need to develop new technology, new strategies. You need to understand and know your enemy better. You also need to be able to adapt, which goes to the changer of ways. So there again, you're feeding Tzeentch. And
So yeah,
then you have the extremes of battle feeding Slaanesh. Everything goes to the warp. Yeah, there's
I
no
don't even know
surviving.
it. Yeah, death's not even the right term for that. It's just
you'd be eaten,
gone. Yeah.
Consumed, I think it'd be a
Yeah.
good, yeah.
Okay, so that's 3. I was debating which way I wanted to go because there's like some time. One of them is really new, but one of them is really cool. So I'm gonna save the cool one, my favorite one,
last.
for later.
I bet
Yeah, yeah.
I bet I know who's gonna be last.
So
I know who's gonna
now
be last.
let's talk about the most recent group,
Yeah.
the
Ooh,
Aeldari.
I was gonna say, I was like, let me guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's the Ynnari.
So before we get into this, guys, the Ynnari are a big deal. They are brand new, but everything you're about to learn has shaped the game into its current state.
Yeah. So yeah, first I mean, yeah, the Aeldari are brand new, but have had a massive impact. Essentially, there was some factions some of the Farseer cults trying to birth a new god of the Eldari, the death god of
Yeah.
death, whatever.
Named
And
Ynnari, that's where they get their
yeah,
thing.
and so
The Whispering God.
one of them, I can't remember his name.
Yvrain?
No,
No,
that's
that's
not her. The guy that did the ritual, but was killed by the Death Watch before he could finish.
Eldrad?
I think that's right. Eldred.
Yeah, Eldrad Ulthran.
Yeah, that's right. Ulthran. That's his fuck. I can remember his fucking name. So yeah, he was trying to like spearhead this raising of the death god, so that you know their idea is that this god comes alive and then will go and kill Slanesh for them. But he goes and tries to do this ritual, and some Death Watch get involved and thwart their ritual. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But it kind of semi awakens this whispering god, who then like looks around and says, "Hey, you're my prophet, my avatar, so to speak." So then
Yeah.
we get this is where Yvrain comes in. She's the one that's like blessed by Inar.
By the
Blessed.
sleeping god who went, "You're in charge."
Yeah.
I'm going back to bed.
And so, yep, she's kind of a badass now, and started a cult around this, obviously, which is, I mean, reformed the cult that was already, or
Yeah.
changed it, into the Inari. Like it's
Legitimized it.
yeah. It was taken out from just being Farseer cults to being a separate faction now, for real. And they are so crazy. Like they are the ones that are responsible for Gilliman coming back.
Yep. They designed the entire thing.
Yep. So
They
yeah,
like
they're
people.
With
No.
like is not the right term. It's more like it boils down to the enemy of my enemy is my friend,
yeah.
and the demand of necessity.
Well, and these are effectively, in a grossly hyper-simplified thing, these are necromancer elves in 40k. They are death cult worshipping, crazy amalgamation, and all of their numbers are made up of all the other factions. Like there are
I was
craft
reading
worlds
that.
in there, there are Drakari in there, everybody is
Harley
just
Quinn.
Hexanites.
yeah. Which we'll get to the Harlequins in a minute.
Yeah, I
But
knew that. I know that's gonna be
But they're red too, so they're
Yeah.
my fan. I like them now. If I have to play an alien, I'd play them.
they we're kind of glossing over like them bringing Gilliman back. It wasn't 100% them. You also have to, of course, always account for Ryan's favorite person in the galaxy right now, Belisarius Cawl.
Belisarius Cawl.
I gotta say, the more I read about Belisarius Cawl, the more I kind of like him.
He's not the focus of this story, though.
But
We
he's
still
not,
have one
yeah.
more faction to get through.
We do.
So yeah, the Ynnari effectively are the death cult that
And there will
resurrected
be
Gilliman.
a lot of Ynnari stuff to come still. I'm barely certain. Like, they've made them such a big deal. I'm pretty excited to see. I like their story. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I think they're neat. The ability to cure the Dark Eldar soulless Dark Thirst shenanigan is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I
Because
agree.
I think they're generating souls, which is kind of cool.
And then our last major faction of the Aeldari is
Yeah.
my favorite. I'm going to guess probably Ryan's favorite too.
Oh yeah.
The Harlequins, who they're
They're
which is
librarians.
awesome. Yeah, they are librarians. They are the keeper of Eldari knowledge, but they
And
are also
history and
circus performers. And
yeah.
it's very apparent in their motif that they are taken from the circus performers, like the jesters and stuff like that. They are unique in that they live in the webway also. And I said there's 3 gods that survived. I did not mention the third one, and this is why. His name is Kegarak, and I've mentioned him in our last episode because he's the one that switched Jagatai Khan and whatever. Fulgrim. So yeah, he's a nuisance. He's a meme lord, honestly.
Yeah, they call him the laughing god. He's exactly a meme lord. I love that description.
So he
That's
actually protects them from Slaanesh. He's not strong enough to go directly to Slaanesh, but they are all working towards something they call the final act, which will be the death of Slaanesh if it goes according to their plans. They are the lowest in number, I believe, among the factions, but they are some of the most badass too. Like, they are assassins, are the end all be all to hit and run tactics.
Oh yeah. Well, they took all of the best stuff from all the other Eldar kind of factions in theory. They jammed it all together, and then they painted a circus motif over the top of it. And so the circus motif comes from them venerating. I've always called him Segarak, but I guess Kegarak would actually be right, because that was his image. Is that kind of mannequin harlequin mask, and they preserve all of the Eldar memories and histories and culture through stage performance. They call them the ghosts in the webway because frankly, they're faster and better at it than the Drukhari are. They just don't use it for the same thing.
Yeah, they also have a unique advantage in that Kegarak actually knows where every door to the webway goes.
Exactly right. And so yeah, when we say that they're badasses, these are absolute badasses. Every one of them is effectively Altair from Assassin's Creed.
But like juiced.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, a lot of these guys actually fight solo on the battlefield, because you have things like the Solitaire that does not carry a bodyguard or fight with units. You have the Dark Jester, which does not, they fight alone, very small units tactics. I love these guys.
They are like, everybody's worried about Slaanesh. Like, they all hate Slaanesh. Kegarak is the only really surviving of the gods. Like, he's the only one that came out unharmed, so to speak. He has a focus on killing Slaanesh. Like, he wants to destroy Slaanesh more than anything. So they are the most anti-chaos of the factions. Maybe with the Ynnari being a close second, because they're a whole thing too. But
they're also go ahead, Ryan.
So they're also one of the only factions that have deviated their focus. Like, all the Eldar either focused inward and protect themselves, or focused outward on trying to strike against Slanesh, or became a parasitic entity to feed Slanesh, whatever. The Harlequins, the reason we call them librarians is because the place that they inhabit within the webway itself is called the Black Library. And effectively, it's the in-game representation of all the literature that GW's ever published. That's why it's called the Black Library. But it's all knowledge, effectively, gathered together into this one massive demi-plane that they live in. And that has put them at odds not just with Slanesh, which is their main, like, they're going to bring her down. But now they are constantly avoiding the attentions of Tzeentch and fighting Tzeentch's people, too. Because Tzeentch wants that knowledge, and his followers want that knowledge. And so, yeah, it's such an amalgamation of all my favorite, like, buzzwords kind of shoved
Yeah,
into
I
one
love the
faction.
Harlequins.
Travis, what'd you have?
Those say they're also at odds when you mentioned Tzeentch wanting to go after the Black Library, because this is the biggest repository of knowledge on the Chaos entities, to include known exploitable weaknesses
Indeed,
for them.
true names.
They're
and all kinds of
also, they're also in a heads up currently over the location of the Black Library with the Inquisition, because they have gotten wind of its existence as well.
So, the Inquisition's actually breached the Black Library a few times. We'll do more on that whenever we get to the actual chapter for it. But yeah, the Black Library is a key feature. So, just like the Drukhari, obviously we have the Black Library. The Drukhari lived in a massive city built in the webway called Camorra. That has been, depending on who you listen to, either destroyed or mostly destroyed by a massive gate opening up and bad things happening, and then the
There's
universe
the
broke
Great
in half.
Rift.
Yeah.
Well, and it opened the.
I think it's got to be mostly destroyed, right? Because they're still
Yeah.
Drukhari, so it wasn't
Yeah.
completely destroyed.
And so, unlike the other Eldar, the reason I think I love the Harlequins so much is they unified in their cult, right? You look at the Aeldari and you have the multiple paths that you can walk, all dedicated to different stuff. They diversified. You look at the Drukhari, and they fell into one of three even major factions between the gladiatorial cults of pain, or the Cabal cults of torture, which are like your nobility stuff, and then you have the flesh warper cults of the homunculi. So witches, Cabalites, and homunculus. The Harlequin didn't have that. The Harlequin are a unified front. They have their thing, and they do it. And I like it. I think it's neat.
They also are the only faction that moves freely among all of the other factions. Everybody welcomes the Harlequins.
All of them.
And that's partly because of the knowledge that they share and collect. They also act as emissaries and ambassadors between some of the factions on occasion when they have need to focus on a greater enemy. Because at this point in time, they also don't like each other very much.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that Drukhari aren't just super well liked amongst the other Aeldari that they kidnap and torture for countless centuries?
Yes, something about that just rubs them the wrong way.
But
so surprised.
Aren't they all against the Greenskins though? Isn't that like their big foe?
Everybody is against the Greenskins.
Yeah.
Well, I know everybody is, but I mean, don't all the Aeldari?
No, that's not a thing.
So the Aeldari know what the orc can do, and so their whole theory on it is population control. They don't want to exterminate every orc, but they know you shouldn't let a whole bunch of them get together.
Yeah, actually, that's one of their main concerns as a whole right now, especially like they've talked about in some of the craft worlds, is that the orcs are approaching a critical mass where there won't be a solution anymore.
Because of Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka, who we've talked about before.
Who the fuck?
Additionally,
we talked about him before on another episode.
I know, but that's quite the name. I just forgot.
Yeah. A lot of this, you have to bear in mind, is leftovers from the very earliest editions of the game, which obviously drew their inspiration from the classic elves and orcs in fantasy literature that kind of came out of chainmail and D&D and Lord of the Rings and stuff. And so it was just kind of a leftover there where that flavor was still there, because early fantasy literature is just super racist for whatever reason. And so elves were supposed to hate orcs. That was the whole thing. There's nothing in the current status of the game that indicates
the Aeldari are just arrogant and hate everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they refer
it's
to
very important.
mankind as the monkey.
Yeah.
because we evolved from apes, and they were like, "That's terrible. Like, you guys evolved? That's ridiculous. We were created perfect."
Yeah.
So I just realized that orcs are cooler than I thought because they're similar to Vikings.
Orcs? No.
It depends on the type of orc. Like, there are orc straight up pirates that are based off of the Golden Age of piracy. There are also orcs based off of Mad Max that just run around on their one planet racing four-wheelers all day.
That's the kind of
Orcs-
orc I'd want to be.
I mean, you'd never run out of gas.
Well,
No,
you
there
don't
are
need
car
gas.
upsides.
goes. It's painted red. It's fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's obviously gonna go.
Red
That's
go fast.
stupid.
But in any case, yeah, the Harlequins, to kind of round out, there are, like I said, there are like 17 different sub-factions. The Harlequins, I think, are my personal favorite. I think they're super cool. But you have your big 4, maybe 5, depending on if you count the
I
Exodite.
think there's like, I want to say
I don't-
there's like 8 major players right now for Eldari, as far as
yeah,
the
you
like
have-
clans and stuff go.
You have your craft world Eldar who preserve their souls in the soul stones and are doing their best to survive Slanesh. You have the Drukari who decided to be on Slanesh's team, even though they really don't want to be, but they don't. Their wants are very personal and selfish, that exist by being soulless entities that feed off the pain of others, and so they're drow, but they're also vampires. It's weird. And then, of course, you have the Corsairs, the Exodites, and the Harlequins.
Yeah, so I mean, the list of the 8 major, like, biggest factions, I guess, that's left of the Eldari. So you have the Eldari themselves, which is your craft world Eldari. You have the Exodites. Those are the people that went to like secluded.
That's actually not true anymore. They have become again taking the name, like all of them have decided to become the Eldari again, because the Imperium of Man called them the Eldar, even
Yeah.
though they're the Eldari. So there's like this whole thing about them all being
You're talking-
Eldari now, and unless you're referring to one of them in relation to another one, then you would differentiate, like Jakari or Suryani.
Additionally,
Craft
this
world
comes
Exodites,
about
Asura,
because-
Yanni, Corsairs, the Asunyani Outcasts, Drukari, Harlequins, Yanari.
Yeah, and then the Outcasts are just, I mean, like I said, they're the
Again,
same
it's
as the
just-
Corsairs essentially.
But yeah,
Now, it is worth being said that the Eldari stuff got a major revision, like, I don't even remember, 5-10 years ago, because GW decided that they had to remake a bunch of their stuff because they couldn't trademark or copyright a lot of things like elf or orc or whatever. And so they renamed a lot of their stuff. The Eldar became the Aeldar so that they could copyright the name. Same with the elves, became the Aelves. Orcs, spelled with a K, that's kind of always been the thing, but they could at least trademark that. You have even giants got renamed into Gargants now, just so they can get their copyright stuff through. And so a lot of the naming convention changed up relatively recently in order to make it more copyrightable.
So that's our, really five main factions of the Eldari that are relevant currently. We could probably get into more, more
I mean, you
detailed.
could jump into any one of those factions
Yeah.
and go for a
We could
full
probably
episode.
do a whole
This is
episode
really
on any one of those.
Any one
But
of
one
them.
thing that I actually kind of glossed over that I also wanted to mention is this is, 10,000 years ago when they fell. It also corresponds, because of their falling, their collapsing of their empire, the Imperium of Man expanded into the galaxy and
Yep.
took over. And so they're very bitter about that, because like this was their galaxy, they were the best, and now
Right.
the Imperium of Man is the dominant force, so to speak, like in the galaxy.
Because we could shit kick them. That's what you're saying.
Well, and here's the big
That's what's
kicker.
important.
The webway has been so tied to the Eldari's like culture and image for so long that everybody seems to forget that the webway was actually the Emperor's primary focus. Like, the webway project was what caused the fall of Magnus the Red and the incursion onto Terra and all of this jazz, because he was doing it.
or
Yeah, I saw a deal the other day where
Well, I was going to say real quick, one thing I want to go over before we do our question of the day at the end. So, tabletop factions, if you're playing the game, I do want to just mention this. Would you guys, are they they up there? Are they useful? Any of their factions? I mean, I know you probably can't blend them together just like other things. Just due to rules and things like that. If you're playing probably tournaments, you can't probably blend all the factions together unless you're playing like Harley Quinns that naturally do that.
It's the
But
Ynnari that naturally do that.
sorry,
Yeah, it's the Ynnari that have a little bit of everybody.
but so are they something that's fun to play? Like, are they?
But they
Are they
are an
decent?
absolute blast to play. So our
Yeah.
buddy Bryce, this was his primary faction when he was playing with us.
Well, and Jordan.
Jordan plays them as well. I think what the Eldar really bring to the table is, and actually our buddy Ugly
Yeah, I was
has
gonna
a
say Ugly
huge
plays Drukari.
Drukari army, but I think what they bring to the table more than anything is some unbelievably unique sculpts that don't really look like anything else, and the fact that you can tailor them to be your tastes.
Yeah, if you're looking specifically at like tournament rank, they're somewhere middle of the pack pretty consistently. I think the highest I've seen them go like heavy on the tournament circuit was right after a brand new release, and they were like third. Imperial
we
Soup
just
is
had.
always going to be the victory.
Which we just had the major Eldar release, and so the Eldari just got a new codex and all their new stuff, and a lot of beautiful new sculpts that have come out. And so, yeah, and Travis, I think you're right. I think they're pretty generally middle of the pack. There are a few tournaments where they excel.
I was like, you definitely have win conditions with Eldari. You can make a very competitive army. So I'm not going to say they're just bottom of the barrel and like absolute garbage.
Yeah, they're not
unless you
trash
just
for sure.
Yeah, unless you just absolutely disregard like the meta, because you can field a terrible Space Marine squad and be dead last.
That's
Like
that's
you gotta kind of strategize.
Well, and I think what makes them fun is that they have a complex army. This is not an army I recommend for anybody to start with. Their mechanics are kind of out there. Their special abilities and psychic abilities are kind of out there. But I think that they are some of the coolest in the game. In fact, whenever I was choosing my factions, I was going to pick one from Imperium, one from Chaos, one from the Xenos armies. And I really thought I was going to go Harlequin for a long time. I even bought models. I switched to Necron shortly after that. But yeah, I think that they are fantastic. My personal favorite amongst the craft world is the Warp Spiders. I think the Warp Spiders are super cool. And but I think the reason people play Eldar more so than the competitive circuit is the fact that Eldar have such a amazing diversity and an amazing history. I think the story with the Eldari is really where it cements it, because elf lovers gonna love some elves.
Anybody have a favorite sculpt?
I'm a big fan of the Solitaire. Actually, I just like.
Yeah,
I mean,
It's a
all
good
all
look.
the Harlequin like sculpts are just like good to me.
yeah. The Harlequin and the Death Jester are probably some of my favorites. In fact, I have a Cadian model. It's a Cadian Castellan model that I run with my IG that is created from a Solitaire model, because I think the model is that cool. Now, some of the new sculpts, admittedly, are super dope. Lycus is the
I was about to bring up. That name was right on the tip of my tongue. That is such a dope sculpt.
so cool. And you can't ignore the Ynnari. The Yakarn sculpt is amazing.
The Autark is also a good one.
Yeah. The Vizark is a really cool model. A little old at this point, but really cool.
Malgan Ra from the Drukari is also pretty solid.
Oh, actually, he's Eldari.
Is he old?
He's not a Drukari. He's So Morgan Ra is the leader of a particular path of
Oh,
like
he's a Phoenix
snipers
Lord,
and hunters.
the Dark Reapers.
Yeah, Dark Reapers that are snipers and hunters and heavy weapons guys.
Ooh.
I gotta say, Yvraine sculpt is kind of mid, in my opinion.
Yeah, Yvraine's sculpt is weird because it gave her a goofy base size, which means interacting with her on the table is annoying.
No, but just like even just the sculpt itself just is kind of underwhelming.
Base
all
size
in all.
matters.
It does.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
In fact,
Fuck, I didn't know that.
yeah, 90% of the
I kind
time,
of dig it.
yeah, I think it's a fine model. I think the only thing that I have a problem with is that the big trail on her coat got base, it got footprint, and I think that's my main complaint. But yeah, as far as like on the table, your base size is probably the most important detail about your model. A model base size and model height really shouldn't be screwed with if you're trying to play in a fair fashion. And that's where I've had my frustrations with a lot of sculpts recently coming out, where the people are like standing on rocks or dramatically posed.
Yeah, they're like an
Because
extra
the
4
taller your
inches off the
model,
top of their base.
yeah, it's a whole thing. And so yes, anytime you were converting your models, call this as just a request from Ryan at Crossing the Nerdverse. When you're converting your models, first off, do it. Converted models are amazing. But secondly, please pay attention to your base size. It's important.
So you're talking about like when they do stuff like shit on the top?
Yeah, so you've been seeing a lot of that recently. And according to the game's rules, any kind of height on a model is very valid. It means it lets you know what you can see over and what you can be seen over. And so you gotta pay a lot of attention to that kind of
I might
shenanigans.
just
I will say
take that shit off then.
just another sculpt to mention, Lilith Hesprax.
From the Drukhari,
Such
she's
a good
fantastic.
sculpt too. That's such a good one.
Well, and we got to bring up the Avatar Kane. Like the brand new Avatar Kane sculpt is so good.
It's so good. I was actually looking at that earlier today. It's so nice.
Yeah. I honestly think when it comes to aesthetics, I think Harlequin have it on lockdown. But I also think that the Drukhari put the Eldari to shame with some of their sculpts. Like the Drukhari sculpts are amazing. They're basically spiky fucking pirates. And you have such a diversity of types of unit that you can field with like different monsters and genetic manipulations and grafting and psychic shenanigans.
The helmetless head for the Avatar of Kane is so spectacular on GW's website. That is a good looking model.
But yeah,
Okay. Everybody enjoyed the
Now I
Eldari
want to go
stuff.
paint.
Is it Eldari or is it Eldar? That's the other thing. Is it
so
Eldari or
Eldar
Eldar?
is low gothic. It's a slang term. It is not official. The Aeldari is the go-to.
Ooh. All right, so that answers the question because I put that shit as today's episode title. So, anyways, all right. The question of the day, we're gonna spin off of Warhammer a little bit. Did you guys read any of the Star Wars novels, like the originals, like Luke Skywalker, Mara Jade, all that bullshit after
Yeah,
the movies
the
came out?
Legends stuff.
All right, so with this new Rey coming out, do you guys think they should follow that path and just switch it in the sense of sexes? So, like, with the new movie coming out, I actually would like to see Star Wars use the old lore. So where you have like instead of having Mara Jade meet Luke, you'd have some male or female, however Disney wants to play this, or whatever entity thing being whatever meets Rey. They get together, have a kid, and then you have the swashbucklers, which would, I guess, technically it'd be Poe, right? So then you'd have Poe, and Poe would have triplets, or no, it'd be twins and another one type of thing with the book. So I would like to see them use more of the book stuff now, because they're being smart and jumping into it with Rey at such a decent age to kind of go the route of some of the storylines that Luke did in the books.
All right, so I'll jump in. I don't understand why I would want them to just rehash old material. I don't want old stuff done again. I don't really care what sex the main character is. That's never bothered me. I actually thought Rey was a really cool character if they'd have treated her appropriately. I don't want them to
If
just
they'd have made
remake
her
Star
anything
Wars.
other than a Mary Sue.
Yeah. I don't want them to just remake Star Wars. There is a infinite well of creative writing that you can do for Star Wars. I think Filoni has done a really that's his name, right?
Dave Filoni, yeah.
Dave Filoni.
Dave Filoni has done a really good job showing that. I don't want them to just rehash old shit again. Hollywood
But they
has such
didn't
a
rehash it,
problem
though.
with that.
They just did books. Most people don't even know that Luke Skywalker had kids. Like, if
Yeah,
you ask people, like,
I
and
get
it was
that.
such a great storyline that was never
But
used.
Which
it's
is
a
fine. If
trap.
they're, yeah. You're
It's a
just going to
trap.
get into people that are like
I mean-
hardcore about the books and they're going to hate it. And then you're going to get people that are like, oh, well, like,
They're going to hate it anyways.
yeah, people are going to hate regardless one way or the other. But I'm kind of with Ryan on that. Like, let it just lie. Like, that was Luke's story.
Leave it
Tell me
alone,
a
yeah.
story. Tell me a good story that's different. Like, you don't have to. You can pull stuff from that, like political powers or aspects as far as the greater galaxy goes. That's fine. You know, you can talk
And
about whatever.
cameos.
Yeah, or you could talk about like the political intrigues that's constantly surrounding Corellia as they switch sides numerous times throughout like various galactic rebellions. You know, that's fine. You can can tie that into a story about another character, but make it their story. Don't give me something you pulled, cut and paste from a different one.
Yeah, this is the
Yeah.
whole argument you get in comics a lot too, right? I don't want just Spider-Man, but he's a girl now. I want a
That's
new
like,
story.
yeah. So I mean, the thing is, like, they do have this large catalog of stuff to work from, and I would like to see some of that in the book, into the shows in some way. But I don't want just I don't want this book adapted into a movie. You know, I
Yeah,
I
I
would
want new
No.
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it's the same thing
like I
with
said,
like
and
comic
since
books,
we're
like you said.
Yeah.
carrying forward with Ray, tell me a unique story with Ray. We don't have to, and it can be something that's not. You can have conflict and struggle that's not on a galactic level. This doesn't have to be a galaxy-wide spanning issue. This could be something local that's a struggle. This could be like the burden of trying to find a place neutral enough to start a Jedi Academy, and like, of course, there's going to be conflict and intrigue, and you can still keep it small scale and make it very interesting, and you can keep it small scale and have the stakes be high
Yeah.
by the perspective of the story, right? Because you look at some of these like localized stories, and if you get the right feeling, it can feel like a world-changing event, when in the grand scheme of things, it's something very small.
But even like, I mean, they could go full on like godlike entities that exist.
Oh yeah,
You know,
Yeah.
I'm down with that too. Like, I would like to see some of the Force
well,
stuff.
and in truth,
They
if
mentioned
they
them
ended
in
up,
Yeah,
the Ahsoka series. They
yeah.
showed them towards the
yeah,
end of it there, the
they were in
statues and
Rebels as
stuff
well.
like that.
But I would honestly be kind of insulted, if I'm honest, if they just rehashed Luke's story and turned it into Rey's
Yeah,
story. Like, that's an insult to Luke, that's an insult to Rey, and it just shows that they have no
it's
idea
an
how to write.
it's an insult to the audience in that point too, because Star Wars fans are going to be familiar with a lot of this lore. Like,
I'd
I'm
be
always of the
interested.
perspective,
Just
but I don't want anything retold. I mean, we've talked about this numerous times, Eric, and you even complained about the number of remakes. And what you're asking for is a remake with a different main character. So same story, different main character.
but this has gone from literature to like the screen. I complain
But it
because when you look at like the initial Star Wars: A New Hope, and then you look at like the Jedi, the first Rey movie, it's the same fucking movie with a different main character. Like they're very similar
Yeah,
movies. Like the whole
and
thing is
that's
very
actually
sim. Like they didn't fucking change much. Like all they
that's
did was
yeah,
actually my
use
point.
young people. Like so that's what I'm talking about. Is like we already
but
know
why?
they're not going
But
to make
why
anything
pull from
super
a book?
different. So I'd like to see
But
the
why?
book because they haven't done it. It hasn't been done. Like they haven't used the
Right.
storyline.
But then why not remake it with different actors and just redo the book in a film series with Luke, and you don't have to change any of the characters.
Or better yet, do a Legends segment where we get movies and television shows in the way the Mandalorian did it, showing the Legends development and doing the story of Mari Jade and
Yeah,
stuff.
Because
I
I
mean, one of
think
the
one of the
but
things you're going to get
you're
from this,
asking Rey to just become Luke, and like Rey needs to be her own character if it's going to succeed.
you kind of are. Yes, I'm not disagreeing with that, but
No, that's 100% what you're asking. That's
she's already
100% what you were
Luke, though.
saying.
She's already Luke.
She's
Like
not.
she is.
Well,
But that's what we're saying is she needs to be
She's already
something
Luke.
else. She needs to have her own story. No, she's not.
100%. She ended the series by killing Palpatine.
I mean,
and here's the thing.
well, this is a crazy debate. This is an unnecessary debate to have right now. But
Yeah. But
we answered the question, and the thing is, like, yes, she is just like a mirror of Luke again. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that. Like, she could be her own thing,
Yeah, she
or
doesn't have
not.
to be
I don't
that.
know. They can do what the fuck they want. They make the money, not me.
Yeah. I would be very disappointed if they just stapled Luke's story onto her any more than they already have. I
Yeah.
honestly think the fact that they retold the first trilogy, the original trilogy, in the newest trilogy with just a different coat of paint was why the movies failed.
Definitely an attribute, and again,
we'll talk another time. There'll be another
we've,
Star Wars thing.
We've jumped into the Star Wars stuff before.
Yep. So before we go, guys, I just wanted to remind you all, if you've watched this far, obviously you're enjoying what you're watching. Best way to support the channel is to do all that algorithm stuff. Give us a like, give us a comment down below so that we know what you want us to talk about for the next chapter. We're going to be continuing our 40K stuff and doing several chapters on the Eldari and other sub-factions. So give us a like, give us a follow, tell your friends to do the same. Second best way to support the channel, of course, is to buy some merch. You'll find the link on our league tree. We've got some cool stuff in there.
So for those of you that follow along, you noticed I no longer have my title belt. Stay tuned to our social media accounts to figure out what happened in that regard. A lot
Yeah,
of
it's out there.
next week's topic is going to be Tyranids, so space bugs. But with that, we're running long on time, so we're going to bring this episode to a close. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. We'll catch you next time.
See you guys.
Goodbye.